So you're ready to begin applying for jobs in the games industry, but where do you begin? Today I'm going to be sharing 10 tips that will hopefully land you your first job in the games industry. Hi, I'm Ree, and welcome to Dev Talk and Tea. As always, before we begin, we're going to spotlight today's brew, which is a pumpkin spice pie by the Tea People. This was a gift actually from my mum last year during the autumnal season, and I need to kind of get rid of some of the teas and hot beverages that I've got. So I've got basically 2 cups left of the pumpkin spice tea. It's very nice. I believe she got it on Amazon, so I will try and find a link below if you would like to have a cup yourself. So last year I wrote a thread on Twitter or X, whatever we're calling it now, for my 10 tips on how to land your first job in the games industry, and that ended up being pretty well received, so I thought it'd be maybe a helpful topic to discuss here on the YouTube channel as part of the Dev Talk and Tea series, so I can further elaborate on the points that I made on the threads. At the time of filming this, it's worth mentioning that it's a really rough time in the industry right now. There are a lot of layoffs currently happening, so this is another reason why I wanted to come on and maybe share some advice from my perspective. And if you are also privileged enough like I am to have a job in the games industry right now, I really do encourage any other developers out there to also share any advice that they can, because it's fairly unprecedented times at the moment. It's really difficult, so any advice I think would be a really great asset to anybody out there, especially young people or people coming out of university looking for their first jobs in the games industry. So let's begin with tip number 1. Make a portfolio. Arguably, a portfolio is the most important thing to have before you even begin applying for jobs in the games industry. It allows recruiters and studios to quickly access your skill set and see what work you've done and the quality of work that you have. It's very rare that an application will be accepted without a portfolio. It's probably just as, if not more important than a CV, in my opinion. This portfolio I recommend should be a website because it's very quick and easily accessible, especially in the technological age. It does not need to be fancy. You do not need to go out of your way to buy a personal domain, for instance. I personally use Wix, and not sponsored, but any sort of free website making platform, you can make a portfolio on that very easily using any template, and you'll have a base to work with. It needs to showcase your best work, it needs to be clear, and it needs to be easy to navigate. A general rule of thumb that I like to recommend is if a potential employer only has about 60 seconds to look at your website or your portfolio, will they be able to see everything that you want to show them? That doesn't mean to speed run everything, of course, but generally employees don't have a great amount of time to review all of your giant portfolio in a big website with lots of tabs. So try and keep it clean and concise where you can to really showcase your skill set. I feel like I could do a dedicated video just on portfolios because it is such a vast topic and there's a lot of good advice out there, and there's a lot of interesting portfolios out there that are interactable, that are not interactable. It's a whole plethora of stuff to talk about, but for now I will leave it there and just make the point again to make a portfolio before you even begin to apply for jobs. Tip 2 is to have your CV ready, as well as a cover letter template ready to go. You'll need a CV to apply for a job anyway, so you should already have that. I would recommend keeping it up to date with the relevant information that's pertinent to the job that you're applying for. So if you're coming out of university and perhaps you are a generalist in games design, but you want to maybe steer towards level design, try to tailor your CV, as well as your portfolio actually, to the job that you would like to achieve. Or acquire, you know what I mean. I also advise tailoring it towards game specific or games relevant information. At the time when I first applied for a first role in the industry, I was also working 2 part-time jobs. I wouldn't recommend putting those 2 part-time jobs on there unless they're relevant to games, as whilst it's great to know that you're hardworking and you are capable of holding up a job, what's going to be more relevant is listing experience like university projects that you worked on, game jams, solo projects that you worked on, and discussing and giving yourself a bit more room to talk about the skill sets you developed specifically for games in the time that you've had up until this point where you're applying for that job. I also recommend checking out the difference between traditional CVs and creative CVs. Personally, I would like to say have both, and use either, depending on the role you're going for, what feels most relevant. Creative CVs are a really nice, interesting and fun way to express yourself rather than having a traditional black and white Word document CV, but it just depends on how you prefer to present yourself and what feels appropriate for the job that you're applying for. There isn't a wrong or right approach to that, by the way, it's just personal preference. As for cover letters, not every job needs one, but I do recommend writing yourself a template ready to use if a job application does require one. Of course, please give yourself room to swap out relevant information, so please don't use the standard "Dear Sir, Madam." Make sure you update the cover letter with the relevant information for the studio you're applying for and the role you're applying for. I'd maybe recommend leaving a little bit of space to elaborate on why you want to apply for that specific job or that particular studio. Maybe you have a fondness for the games they make, maybe you admire their work ethic, maybe you've been a fan for many, many years. Allow yourself that room to add that little bit of individuality to a cover letter so it doesn't feel so rigid and as if you've just copy-pasted something. Tip 3, I've already mentioned it briefly, but tailor your CV and your portfolio to the job that you want. As I mentioned, I left university as a generalist and my portfolio was a mess. I didn't know what to focus on, I wasn't sure what role I wanted to have. I just wanted to get my foot in the door. I just wanted to take that first step into the games industry. But it's very difficult for potential employers to actually understand what my skill sets were and know what it was that I excelled at. People who apply for the same job that you're applying for may have a more specialist skill set and that might be more appealing. So what I'd suggest is maybe spend some time deciding what job roles you would like to have, what your dream job is, and tailoring your CV and your portfolio to reflect that. It's okay to have other generalist things on your portfolio. Let's say you do 2D art in your spare time. It's totally fine to have a tab on your website that showcases some of your best 2D work, but make sure your main focus on both of those pieces of paper, online documents, just make sure that they're tailored to the job that you would like to have. Just make sure you're not spreading yourself too thin and that you're focusing and showing the skill set for the job that you want. Tip 4, apply everywhere, literally everywhere. So when I was finishing uni, I at first kind of cherry-picked where I wanted to apply for. I wanted to work for my favourite studios or where my favourite games were, or limited myself to the genre of game that I wanted to make or I enjoyed playing the most. But honestly, that does limit you and the opportunities that you could potentially have. I encourage you to apply for anywhere that you feel comfortable applying for. Remote working has now become a little bit of a staple in tech industries, and although some studios are going back to the more traditional working in office side of things, there are a lot of studios who also offer more flexible hybrid roles or fully remote roles, so don't feel put off by applying for a studio that is half the way across the world, because you're never going to get it. You might, you don't know. It never hurts to try. The last point I want to make is please put aside any reservations or prejudices against certain genres, especially. I have had conversations with students who have not applied for roles because they only want to work in AAA, or they don't hold mobile gaming to the same standard as everywhere else. That kind of perspective, again, can really limit the opportunities that you're looking for. You're only doing yourself a disservice, and that mindset, in my opinion, is a little toxic. There are so many amazing games utilizing different platforms, different budgets, different workforces, so don't limit yourself to that sort of small-minded thinking of, oh, I don't like that because it's a mobile game, or I don't like that because it's an indie game, or I don't like that because it's not AAA. I don't know, just cut that kind of thinking out completely, because you're really doing yourself a disservice. Tip 5, do not wait to hear back. So you've applied for one or maybe a couple of studios. What do you do now? The correct answer is go apply for like a billion more jobs. Studios can take literally months to get back to you, especially if it's a very enticing or limited job opportunity where they get a lot of applicants. So please do not sit around and wait for them to get back to you. Continue applying for jobs and continue applying yourself to getting a role in the industry. It's not guaranteed that your application will be successful or that you'll even move forward to an interview stage. Sometimes it's just tough and can feel a little bit bittersweet. So please don't stop applying. Please keep finding roles that you're interested in and keep on going. For reference, it's typically frowned upon to keep reapplying for the same role. So once you've sent in your application, if you don't hear anything back, a good rule of thumb is maybe check in after a 6-month period. The other thing I've heard is if a new role opens up in the same studio you've applied for, but you've not applied for that specific role, you can reapply for that new role. It's just basically use a little bit of common courtesy. Tip 6, keep your work up to date. I'm going to be honest with you, for a lot of people it takes a while to land their first job in the industry. For those lucky of you to land your first job in, within the first 6 months, that's fantastic and that's amazing. The reality is a lot of people have to try for a lot longer. For me, it was just literally that 6-month mark where I first started my first job in industry after I graduated. I actually started applying for jobs before graduation, so I think I must have been applying for at least 8 months before I actually had my first day in industry. In that time frame, it's really important to keep your finger on the pulse of your own skill set, keeping yourself accountable, looking at what other solo projects you can work on, any game jams you can get involved in, taking tutorials, online courses, YouTube tutorials, just to make sure you're keeping not only yourself up to date, but your portfolio and your CV as well, making sure they're refreshed, keeping up to date so they're as polished and as good as they can be. Tip 7 is networking. Networking can play a huge role in landing you your first job in the industry. Some people would argue that networking is just as important as having a good portfolio and a CV. It's not what you know, but who you know. And what's the point of having a wonderfully polished CV if you're not putting yourself out there in the world and introducing yourself to fellow industry professionals? I think networking can be very intimidating, especially when you've not done it before and it's very new to you. There's this idea that you have to be super charismatic. You have to walk into a room with like the sleekest business card and say, hello, yes, I am a professional. Honestly, it's not like that. And that's actually kind of weird. I'd recommend just finding events that you're comfortable going to with the mindset of just talking to people. You don't have to have this polished, sleek persona to talk to people about your interests. So going to events like EGX, or maybe applying for something like BAFTA, or maybe finding your local games network or guild or meetup, can really be helpful to just go there, say hello to a few people, hear about what they do, and then talk about yourself a little bit. Literally just turn up to places, make friends, connect with people. Look at mentors as well. Don't be afraid to kind of reach out to people on LinkedIn and say, hey, I would love to hear your advice, or I'd love to get your feedback on something, or look at mentorship programs like Limit Break, for instance, and just connect and network with people. I feel like networking could also be another topic in of itself because there's so much to cover, but either way, I recommend that you do it. Just gotta update my little teapot. I feel like when you get to the end of a bag of loose leaf tea, you get a little bit like, do you know what I mean? That's what I'm currently going through right now. It's nice, but it's a bit. Tip 8, practice for interviews. This might sound dumb, but just practice for your interview. Even if it's your first job for industry or your first job ever, I recommend just having a practice. There's no need to panic and feel like you have to know everything. Entry-level positions are for people who are new to the industry. Nobody is expecting you to know everything about how to make a video game, know the pipelines and the processes and all the technical terms. Of course, all of these things do help, but honestly, most first stage interviews are just to kind of get to know you, understand your experience, and understand your passions. Think about things like why you're passionate about games, why you like making games, what are your favourite games and why. What can you offer if you were to join a team? I also really encourage you to research about the company you're going to interview with before you head to the interview. It's a little bit embarrassing if you turn up and you don't really know anything about the company, any of the games you make. At best, you kind of seem unprepared. At worst, you can come across as a little bit arrogant. Arrogant? What did I... Arrogant. Arrogant. I can't remember the word I was going to use, but we're going to go with arrogant. It seems like you don't care, basically. You could come across that you just genuinely don't care. Maybe you're a bit arrogant about it. Not arrogant. I've interviewed people before where I've asked them, oh, so why did you join this company? Why did you want to apply for this role? And they've kind of shrugged and gone, I don't know, I just want my first job in the industry. And that comes across as a little bit dismissive. So I encourage you to research about the company, understand why you'd want to work there, and maybe show off with a little bit of knowledge if you want to, like, oh, I understand that you established yourself 15 years ago and I've really admired your progression into the studio that you are now, and I hope I can help contribute. Oh my god, if someone turned up to an entry-level position with that, then amazing, great, we love to see it. If everyone now uses that, I'm sorry. I've given you one for free. There you go. Tip 9, do not give up. I've already mentioned how difficult it is to get a job in the industry, especially during these unprecedented times. But I will remind you again, please do not give up. There are so many different opportunities and ways that you can get into the industry, whether it be through applying for a AAA studio, starting your own indie studio, being a freelancer. So please do not give up and be disheartened if you keep getting rejected, especially after a long period of time. It is so unbelievably hard to deal with rejection, especially if you're not given the feedback as to why, or it's very limited feedback, or it's feedback like, oh, we really liked you, but we ended up just going with a different candidate. Like, there's not a lot you can do with that, and it's hard, but you just kind of have to find that fight and just keep going and trying to find a way to get hold of something and make your first step and get that foot in the door, because it is out there, genuinely. I think the industry is so vast and there's such a big passion for playing games. I do believe that there is room for everybody to be able to make the games that people want to play and that they want to play themselves. What's that saying? You miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. So make sure you take all of the shots you can. And tip 10, finally, we come to the end. My final piece of advice is, don't just listen to me. I am but one developer in a sea and a world full of other developers. I can share my advice and experience, but there are many others who can have incredibly insightful advice and experience to share with you. If you take something away from this video and it works, then amazing, that's fantastic. But please don't just listen to me. Go out there and speak to other industry professionals, network, reach out on LinkedIn, listen to what other people have to say. In a year's time, this video might be redundant. There might be a brand new shiny way to really get your foot in the door of the industry. But for now, I really hope you take away something from this video that was helpful, even if it was, I don't like any of what she said, I'm gonna do it this way instead. At least it gives you reassurance into the way that you want to go about things, right? Thank you so much for watching. I know I don't post very often, but when I do, I like to try and make something that's worth people's time to watch. If you like games industry content or other nerdy things like LARP and D&D, then feel free to follow my socials or maybe subscribe to this channel where I might post eventually again, who knows. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you next time.